State Department of Education. Our speakers include Christopher Soriano, who's the Associate Commissioner in the Office of Special Education, Dr. Eileen Borden, Chief Special Education. She's the Chief of Special Education Services in the Policies and Due Process Units. And we have Judy Sercheski, who is Assistant Counsel to State Ed, as well as Susan Bowling, also Assistant Counsel at State Ed. We appreciate so much your willingness and time to weigh in on this important topic. And with no further comment, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Julie. And I just want to, oh, I'm sorry, Judy. Thank you, Julie. I just wanted to, thank you for introducing all of us so we can, I was going to do that, but we'll continue to move forward. I just wanted to, again, thank you and thank you to everybody for the opportunity to come and speak with you today. And we look forward to the conversation and, sharing this information with you. And just a little format, we're going to kind of go in between the four of us and take sections of the PowerPoint. So we appreciate you guys handling the turning of the pages that you'll be doing for us, but we'll be bouncing between the four of us as well. So again, good afternoon, everybody, and we look forward to getting started here. So I'm going to pass it over to Judy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Judy Sercheski. I'm an attorney in the Office of Counsel at State Ed. I am a senior manager for issues in P-12 education, but my personal portfolio includes special education, and I've been working with the Office of Special Education for about a decade. So because I'm here in primarily a legal role, I thought that we should start with some level setting, because things that you're hearing about in the news and that are coming out of the federal government are happening very quickly and chaotically. And I think it's helpful to realize how the process is supposed to work and the framework that already exists and how that works. So if you could move to the next slide. Thank you. So first of all, IDEA is a law. It's a federal law, and there's a federal framework for laws. So there are federal statutes. Those laws are passed by Congress and then signed by the president. The president can veto certain laws, and there's an override process. But the laws that we're talking about today, primarily the IDEA, are existing laws that have been passed by Congress. Additionally, there are federal regulations that are agencies promulgate them pursuant to a public rulemaking process. So there's IDEA, and then IDEA has regulations that implement the statutory language. Federal agencies also put out sub-regulatory guidance. So there's guidance documents from US DOE. Some of those have changed or been pulled down depending on the administration. Those are not legally binding, but they give you a sense of how the agency is interpreting the laws, and, as far as them having, a policy agenda, those guidance documents will spell that out. Similarly, there's Dear Colleague letters. So people can write to US DOE with a question, and they will write you back, kind of giving, I don't want to say advice, but kind of advice and explaining, their take on the issue. But again, those are not legally binding, but they do give you a sense of what US DOE is thinking. Courts historically have given deference to agency interpretation of their own rules, but that's started to change a little. So, when looking at guidance or Dear Colleague letters, while they may be helpful, you have to remind yourself that they do not have the force of law. After the federal law, there are also state laws. So in New York State, we have the education law. And then we have regulations of the Commissioner of Education. Those are, we call them the Part 200 regulations. And then state ed, similar to USDOE, we put out our own guidance. So we have guidance documents. We have appeal decisions to the commissioner, although those deal less with special education issues. But those are, legal appeals that commissioner has decided. So they're kind of binding. We also have the Office of State Review that hears special education appeals. Those are not binding, although they get a lot of deference from courts because they're very lengthy and well-reasoned. We also have opinions of the Office of Counsel that provide opinions on how the department thinks certain case law and certain laws, federal and state, should be interpreted by school districts and schools within New York State. Next slide. So IDEA is the law that makes FAPE available to students with disabilities. So FAPE, everyone probably knows, is a free, appropriate public education. This is a national law. It's a funding law. So states opt into this law to receive federal funding, and in return, they agree that they are going to follow the requirements of the federal law. And this is just a screenshot of IDEA and the statute online. Next slide, please. In addition to IDEA, there are IDEA implementing regulations. Again, those are advanced by agencies. So the law sometimes needs to be fleshed out a little, or sometimes the law will even say, like, the Secretary of USDOE needs to promulgate regulations on this matter. If an agency is going to issue new or revised regulations, they usually have to go out for a public comment period before they're implemented, unless there's an emergency exception. So those regulations are published. Members of the public write in to submit comments, questions, concerns, and then those comments are addressed in like an assessment of public comment where they respond to the comments and questions that they got, which is a helpful tool when you're interpreting things, because it'll give their thought process. Like, this doesn't need to be clarified because we think it's clear that we mean this. So right now, IDEA is the same. There have been no proposed changes. There are not regs out for comment. Like, that legal framework is stable. Next slide, please. The U.S. Department of Education is also stable. I know that the president issued an executive order talking about dismantling the department. An executive order is not able to circumvent the rulemaking process. So the United States Department of Education was created by a statute. It was created by the Department of Education Reorganization Act, which establishes the departments and many of the offices inside of the department. The program offices that exist in the department that are not part of the Department of Education Reorganization Act are required by other statutes. So the programs that USDOE runs and administers they are required by statute to be administered by USDOE. So for USDOE to be dissolved, there needs to be an act of Congress. And then also, there's talk of, moving functions around, maybe to other agencies. Again, because of the way IDEA is written, that cannot be done unless there is a statutory change, because it is required by statute to be administered by the department. So one of the examples is the US DOE used to administer library funding. That was changed. There was a new agency created, the Institute of Museum and Library Sciences. They are now in charge of all of the library things. That took a statutory change. So again, right now, US DOE still exists, and the offices within it, which Chris is gonna go through some of the offices that we're working with still exist, are still staffed, and things are kind of running business as usual in the special education landscape.
Next slide, please.
Are you next? Okay.
Thank you, Judy. And yes, to Judy's point, I'm going to go a little bit deeper into some of the offices that are part of the United States Department of Education. Again, the US DOE is that executive branch that enforces and implements the laws that are passed by Congress. And the office I want to focus on here is the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services, which I'll refer to as OSERS. Again, OSERS is really designed to improve outcomes for early childhood through employment and post-secondary outcomes for people with disabilities, their families, their communities, and the nation as a whole. Underneath OSERS, you have the Office of the Assistant Secretary. I do want to zero in on the Office of Special Education Programs, OSEP, in a second. I'll get back to that. And then there is the Rehabilitation Services Administration, RSA, which is an office that the State Education Department, the New York State Education Department, does work closely with through our Adult Career and Continuing Education Services, our Access Vocational Rehabilitation Office. That office in the New York State Education Department does interact and work with the RSA at the federal level. I want to really point out that the Office of Special Education at the State Education Department, that we work very closely with the United States Department of Education. We have, and we are continuing to today. And we specifically work very closely with with OSERS, as well as very closely with that Office of Special Education Programs, OSEP. We meet routinely with OSEP. We have been doing that for years now, and we have been continuing those meetings with OSEP, where we discuss both monitoring and oversight, as well as areas of technical assistance that are at the federal level that have an impact for us in New York. So we have those ongoing conversations with OSEP, and those, we have seen no changes in any messaging from OSEP that we're going to be diminishing or changing any of the interactions that we have had with them, and are planning to continue to have with them as we look to improve outcomes for special education in New York State. And then again, there is the Office for Civil Rights, which is, basically the office that enforces federal civil rights and laws and schools and other recipients of funding through the U.S. Department of Education, and that's throughout the nation as well. And again, just so to point out, everything in blue on the screen are hyperlinks that you can get more information throughout the PowerPoint on those particular areas. Next slide, please. Going to talk a little bit more about OSEP. Again, OSEP is the office that the Office of Special Education at the State Education Department works most closely with at the U.S. Department of Education. Again, it focuses on improving results from the early learning years. So we're looking at infants, toddlers, and preschool age children all the way through age 21. And it provides, the OSEP really does provide both that leadership to states, as well as that financial support to assist states and our local school districts. OSEP administers funding authorized under the IDEA for both Part B and Part C of the IDEA, and they award those to states annually. A little bit later in the slide deck, we will get into more around the IDEA funding. But again, those funds are critical to New York. those funds really do support early intervention services as well as preschool special education and school-age special education services for New York State students with disabilities. So critical funding. We are not receiving any signals that there is going to be a diminishing of any of those fundings or withholding or redirecting of any of the IDA funds that we receive as a state. And again, we're going to talk a little bit more about that later in the slide deck, as well as we also receive discretionary grant funds, or OSEP issues discretionary grant funds to institutions of higher education and other organizations that really support OSEP's research functions, technology, professional and personnel development, as well as parent training and information centers. So again, federal funding that has a direct impact on the services that we provide in New York. We are again not receiving any signals of any diminishing of those services at this point. I believe, though, and we may touch upon it later in the slide deck, but I believe there were some cuts to the research arm of the U.S. Department of Education. So, but yet to see, the long-term impacts or the immediate impacts that might be having. But we can talk a little bit more about that. Next slide, please. I really want to just really now talk about a division within OSEP, which is the Monitoring and State Improvement Planning, MSIP. That division really is a division of OSEP that provides the direct monitoring of the state's compliance and the resolution of any identified non-compliance. Not going to go through all the points on this slide. There's a lot of information, just giving you some highlights. This MSIP also provides the guidance and technical assistance to states. They disseminate information about policies, guidance, regulations, as well as guidance in all areas of the state's responsibilities to be implementing the components and the purposes and requirements of IDEA. We work closely with this division. We interact directly. This division interacts directly with the field, with parents and other stakeholders that may reach out directly to OSEP with their concerns or questions. And then that is a space where then OSEP would then reach back out to New York to discuss any concerns they may have, or to work with us on any follow-up on some individual customer concerns they have. They do provide information to the field around their rights when they reach out to the federal government. And then they often are very, very efficient in the way that they then reach out to the state for us to follow up. So again, just to demonstrate that we have had a long-standing, close relationship with the U.S. DOE, specifically with OSEP, and we are not getting any signals of any diminishing of that relationship and or their responsibilities to be implementing the requirements of IDEA, and then them turnkeying that to New York on our responsibilities and continuing to monitor and implement the requirements and purposes of IDEA. So again, just to really get the message across that, we are not hearing any change in the levels of services that they are providing to us and that we will be providing to districts and New Yorkers. I think now I'm going to be turning it over to Suzanne. Is that correct?
Yes. Thank you, Chris.
Yep.
So I'm going to go over some concepts and general supervision activities that New York State does and every state does. And again, kind of following sort of what Judy and Chris outlined, is that these activities are contained within the IDA statute. So for example, my slides are really going to cover what is in section 1416 of the IDEA statute. And that is sort of the piece of the statute that talks about monitoring, technical assistance, and enforcement. And sort of there's within the IDEA sort of a structure of that there's going to be monitoring activities, enforcement, improvement activities, technical assistance activities. And really in that section of IDEA, the statute says that there's a primary focus on improving educational results and functional outcomes. Oh, sorry, you can stay in the same slide. Thank you. That there is a focus on improving educational results and functional outcomes for children with disability, and that that the states are ensuring that the requirements of IDEA are being met, including those requirements that are most closely related to improving educational results for children with disabilities. And so the state performance plan is also contained within the statute of IDEA, which says that every state has to have in place a state performance plan. And the point of that plan is to evaluate the state's efforts to implement the requirements of the IDEA, and then also how the state will improve its efforts for implementation. This is required, again, all rooted within the IDEA statute, that we annually report our progress. So that includes sort of data, technical assistance, it includes improvement activities, and it includes sort of monitoring that we do on certain compliance items. And that gets reported on an annual basis with sort of an overarching plan with our targets for a 6-year period that gets updated every 6 years. So we do more sort of activities around that target setting, which is required at least every 6 years. And then annually, we also talk about updating our data, and kind of the technical assistance and the monitoring and the improvement activities that we are doing. And the link to our most recent SPP APR is included on the slides. You can sort of see what is New York State's current report. Right now, we have submitted in February a new report, and that we'll be doing clarification and then ultimately publishing when it's accepted by the United States, by OSEP. And again, we submitted on time. They're doing clarification period, and we're expecting, that the traditional process for review, accepting, and posting is going to continue. So next slide. So these are 18 indicators that are included within the state performance plan annual performance report. And again, this is also rooted in the IDEA statute, again, 1416, which does have sort of monitoring priorities. And so that these are the indicators that align with the statutory priorities, which are the provision of a free, appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment, the state's exercise of general supervisory authority, including child find, effective monitoring, the use of resolution sessions, mediation, voluntary binding arbitration, and a system of transition services, and the disproportionate representation of racial and ethnic groups in special education and related services to the extent that the representation is the result of inappropriate identification. And so all of these indicators align with a monitoring priority. And each one of these has its own kind of measurement in terms of what the expectation is. Some of these, we establish targets. And we do that through stakeholder engagement in terms of what we think New York State's target should be for example, graduation rate. And some of these are compliance indicators, which mean that the expectation is 100%. So for example, child find or initial evaluations, it's the expectation that 100% of children get evaluated within 60 days of parental consent. But so for each one of these indicators, we collect data and about the children's performance or the school district's performance and meeting the requirements of IDEA. And then we're able to see, based off of this data, how that school district or LEA is performing, and then in aggregate, how New York State is performing in these outcomes, in these outcome areas. And so again, you can see there's 18 of them. Each of them have their own measurement. Each of them have their own analysis, and we cover all of them in that SPP APR report that we issue annually. Next slide. We also publish by school district what that school district's performance is under each indicator. Some of the indicators are cyclical, which means not all districts report on them on an annual basis, but most of them are annual for all districts. And in order to see sort of how an individual district does under those indicators, we publish at data.nysed.gov something that is called special education data, or a special education data report. And so by going to data.nysed.gov, at the top of the website, you can sort of see there's a county, BOCES, district, schools, higher education, and downloads. If you select districts, under the student data, there's an enrollment data report, an English language learners data report, and a special education data report. Our currently published data report is for the 22-23 school year. So that's why you'll sort of see, if you click on the 22-23, you'll see the special education data report. We are currently working on making that 23-24 special education data report available as well. And we anticipate that to be published sometime in June. We are considering trying to publish that sooner in the year. But currently we anticipate that the 23-24 report is going to be available by district in sometime in June for the 23-24 school year. Next slide. So the information of these indicators that we report to the federal government, that is used in addition to monitoring of visits or other public information that's used by OSEP to then give all of the states an IDA determination. They score us against what we submit and the information that we submit. And again, this is also rooted in the IDA statute. And there are currently 4 designations that a state could get. And the first is meets requirements and purposes of IDEA. The second is needs assistance in implementing the requirements of the IDEA. The next is needs intervention in implementing the requirements of the IDEA. And then finally, needs substantial intervention in implementing the requirements of the IDEA. Next slide. New York State is currently a needs assistance district. So of those categories, we were determined a state that is in needs of assistance in implementing the requirements and purposes of the IDEA. And our determination is made publicly available. It's posted publicly. And our score and the reasons why we scored what we scored under that metric based off our state performance plan data is also made publicly available. And so in terms of our score, we scored a 62.5%. And that was based on some performance results indicators and then some compliance indicators. And that is our current ID determination. We will anticipate to get another determination this year following clarification. So this is our current status. And then traditionally, there will be an updated status, again, sometime in the early summer or potentially mid to late summer. But again, right now, we're being told it's business as usual. And so we should expect that there'll be the clarification period as traditionally operates, and then ultimately an identification or a determination for New York State under traditional sort of operating procedures. Okay, next slide. So we do use, obviously, the determination process and our data in the SPP APR. We do a lot of data analysis. We use it for stakeholder engagement and have conversations with educators, with district superintendents, with school district superintendents, with parents and families about how are the districts doing and how is New York State doing and responding to these monitoring priorities and these requirements of the IDEA. And we use all that information, including our indicator data, our designation, to direct what our oversight and monitoring activities should be. And this includes sort of some risk-based monitoring. So, you know, if we sort of see a need in a particular area, then that's where we can deploy our resources. And we also do cyclical reviews, and we look at both student-specific and systemic issues. I think it's really important because obviously when the student-specific issues come to our attention, we have to make sure that we are addressing and resolving that for the particular student. But the data really also helps us give a systemic lens lens to, if this is occurring or if this is a trend, then we really need to look at systems change so that we can prevent it from happening to individual students. So we really use that information to have kind of inform our general supervision plan so that we make sure that we're targeting the areas that need our attention, that we are conducting the reviews that resolve both for student specific and then also systemic issues that we're seeing in the implementation of the IDEA. We also use it to inform where we're going to deploy professional development and technical assistance resources through our educational partnership tiered interventions. So there's a lot, again, in those 18 indicators, and then we use other monitoring information to inform where can we deploy assistance to school districts so that they can improve outcomes and improve compliance. So that information also then informs where we target those resources. And then we also use that data and monitoring and information that we obtain through our general supervision to inform the guidance that we develop in our stakeholder engagement activities, aimed at informing the public and improving outcomes for students with disabilities. Because we really want to target our resources, our oversight, our monitoring, our professional development, and our guidance investments to the areas that we think are needed and will ultimately make the biggest impact to improving outcomes and ensuring that students with disabilities benefit from the full implementation of the IDEA. And I think now I'm going to pass it over to Eileen Borden. And you're on mute, Eileen.
Great. And Chris, I think you wanted to add something.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to some information that was shared from the very beginning of the presentation through Suzanne's section, and it's kind of relevant to some of the themes of some of the comments and questions I'm seeing in the chat. In that, if there was no Department of Education, or still New York State would have an oversight responsibility to ensure the implementation of the IDEA. So to those hypothetical situations of what if all the staff at the USD Department of Education are fired? What if there is no US DOE anymore? As long as, and I hope you get the understanding that that's not the situation now, and that would be a very, that's a complex process to make happen. So today we still have the US DOE. Today we still have the IDEA. And even if there wasn't the US DOE, we would still be obligated as a state to ensure that the purposes and requirements of the IDEA were being implemented. So we would have that federal oversight and monitoring if there was a situation where there wasn't the Office of Special Education Programs at the federal level anymore. Eileen.
So earlier, Chris, he highlighted the funding that was authorized by IDEA, and that's going to be the focus of my part. And states receive grants each year under IDEA to provide special education and related services to children with disabilities ages 3 through 21. And states are required to submit the Part B annual state application in order to receive this grant award. And I'm going to provide a little bit more detail on that process. Next slide. So each year, New York is awarded 2 federal Part B IDEA grants to assist us in providing a free, appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment for students with disabilities ages 3 through 21. The first is the Section 611 grant, and those funds are used to support the provision of special education and related services to students with disabilities 3 through 21. The second is the Section 619 grant, and those funds are used to support the provision of special education and related services to students with disabilities between the ages of 3 through 5. And last year's grant award for Section 611 was approximately $907 million and about $37 million for the Section 619 grant. Congress has not yet made the appropriations for 2025 available yet. Next slide. Well, this is a lunch and learn webinar, so I thought a little slice of pie might be helpful for those that are not eating their lunch and are just thinking about it. You'll see from this pie chart that approximately 85 to 90% of New York's IDEA grant work goes directly to local educational agencies, that is LEAs. To receive Section 611 and Section 619 subgrants, the LEA must annually submit its Part B grant application to the state. In New York State, LEAs include public school districts, special act school districts, state agency programs for school-age students, and the 2 state-operated schools. That is the New York State School for the Blind and the New York State School for the Deaf. Next slide. So I'm going to give a little bit of breakdown of the pie, one slice. So while most of the federal funds provided to states must be passed on to the LEAs, a portion of the funds may be used for state-level activities. These set-aside funds may be used for administering Part B and the coordination of activities with and providing technical assistance to other programs that provide services to students with disabilities, including staffing and contractual costs. This slice of the pie shows a breakdown of the anticipated set-aside administrative funds for the 2025-26 school year in 3 main areas. The first is the largest portion of funds, approximately 60%. Those are being allocated to contractual services costs, which include the Office of Special Education's Educational Partnership, and Suzanne highlighted that work, personal shortage projects, and mediation services. The second portion is followed by salaries and fringe costs, approximately 35%. Then the last part of that 15% set aside is for non-personnel costs, about 5%. Next slide. And as part of the annual IDEA Part B grant application, states are required to provide the following 4 key elements. First, assurances that the state has policies and procedures in effect to comply with IDEA requirements. Second, identification of state-imposed requirements not required by IDEA and federal regulations. Third, description of the use of federal funds from the Part B grant. And lastly, maintenance of state financial support. Next slide. As required, New York State has posted its 2025 Part B application, and public comment can be submitted through May 11, 2025. You'll see from the slide on the left, this is a screenshot from the Office of Special Ed webpage specific to Part B. And on the right side, you'll see under the public comment section, there is highlighted in blue, and that is a web link to that page. The state will review and consider all public comments that are received through May 11, 2025, and will make any necessary modifications to the Part B application as appropriate. And the due date for us to submit the Part B application to the United States Department of Education is May 21st, 2025. And we've heard no change on that timeline. I will now pass it over to Chris Suriano, and we will go next.
Thank you, Eileen. And just really to reiterate that, as of today, the federal framework of IDEA, there's been no changes. That statute has not been amended, which means there's no law to amend IDEA that has been passed by Congress and signed by the president at this time. We're not seeing any amendments to IDEA regulations being proposed. To what Eileen just spoke to, we have not seen any reduction or elimination of the IDEA grant funding that we are expected to receive in New York State. Again, OSEP continues its mission functions that we discussed earlier when it comes to working with states, when it comes to their oversight responsibilities under IDEA, which when it comes to the funding that we receive from the federal government. So their core their core mission components are still intact and are moving forward, as well as I believe Suzanne said business as usual. New York State and other states and our districts, we're all operating per our usual requirements, and will continue to do so until, there is something that we have to change and react to. But at this point, it is, to borrow Suzanne's words, it is business as usual when it comes to the Office of Special Education. Next slide, please. Again, OSEP's mission remains the same. They are there with their dedication that they have been to improve results from early learning all the way through age 21, and then as well as, those post-secondary outcomes and experiences. All of that is still there. The activities that we typically engage with OSEP are still moving forward as they have in the past. So you'll see our IDA Part B and the Part C grant applications moving forward. We are looking at to what Suzanne spoke to, our state performance plan and an annual performance report. We submitted our annual performance report in February per the usual process. We are expecting to hear clarification and feedback from OSEP, and we are continuing to move forward and conduct our monitoring activities as a state under our state performance plan and APR. The differentiated monitoring and support structure from the federal government is still in place. We continue to meet with OSEP around the areas that we are correcting New York State's identified noncompliance, as well as where we're looking to continue to drive support and improvement with our outcomes under the state performance plan and special education outcomes in general. And OSEP continues, just not on even on the monthly basis they have with New York, they continue to provide as an agency the technical assistance nationwide, and we are not seeing any diminishing in our interactions directly. So New York's interactions with OSEP, no diminishing in that contact and level of support, but we're also not seeing any impact on that national level as well. And next slide, please. These are things to watch for. So, if there is IDA funding reductions or limitations or restrictions or redirections by some action that may occur at the federal level, that is something that we would be, that is something that would impact New York, but that is not the case today. You want to keep your eyes out for any changing to the Medicaid funding. If there are cuts that are impacting services for children with disabilities, that's again something that we would want to continuously watch. We are continuously monitoring what is occurring at the federal level. And when there are things that are signaling possible impacts to the work of the Office of Special Education, we'll be sure to notify the field in an expedited manner. Amendments to any IDA statute or regulations, again, to what I just spoke to, there have been none to date, as well as, we would want to watch for if there are signals from OSEP that they will be changing how they interact with us or the services that they provide or the activities that we engage with them. If they're beginning to see changes in that level of support that we receive, again, that's something we're watching for. But to all four of these bullets here on this slide, while these are things to watch for, these are not things that are occurring that are looking to impact our current work and our mission as a state education department and as the Office of Special Education to ensure that we are doing the monitoring and supporting of our districts, our families, and our parents to ensure that we as a state are doing what we need to be doing under the IDEA, and we'll continue to do that as we move forward. So with that, I'm just going to ask my team if there's anybody that needed to add anything. Otherwise, I'm going to kick it over back to Julie.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something, Chris, to what you said. And I am seeing some questions about it in the chat too, about if funding was withheld, would we challenge it? We work very closely with the Office of the Attorney General Like Chris said, IDEA funding, there's been no talk of withholding it. There haven't been threats of withholding it. But there have been with other funding. And so I encourage you to check the Office of the Attorney General's website. She has press releases all the time. On April 4th, she sued the Trump administration to protect libraries and museums, along with other state attorney generals. So those challenges are happening. It's just very, it's difficult to keep track of what's being challenged and by who. So the best way to stay on top of the AG's office is to watch their press releases.
Hope I was on mute. Julie, I think it's back to you.
Thank you. I just had to get my buttons. Thank you so much. That was very informative, and it's great to hear NYSED's perspective and present an overview about how it all works together, because I think most of us are familiar with the state piece, but your interaction with the U.S. Department of Ed is very informative. Some of the questions in the chat have been answered, and I have actually tried to screen them a bit, but I'm going to pop some ones that I think we've received multiple inquiries about and go from there. One is, what happens to 504 students and complaints about violations of 504? What are the options?
So 504 still exists. It is a federal anti-discrimination law that protects the rights of students, well, individuals with disabilities in places that receive federal funds. So the relevance here is that that applies to students who go to school. That law is enforced by US DOE's Office of Civil Rights. The state education department does not have jurisdiction to enforce that law. We're not charged with oversight of that law. I know that historically, Office of Civil Rights investigations have taken a very long time. And it's concerning that they have downsized the Office of Civil Rights. There were closures of regional offices, although I don't know how much staff impact they had, but certainly with the administration's renewed focus on anti-DEI initiatives, I don't know how many of those types of investigations the Office of Civil Rights will be taking on. New York State has its own anti-discrimination law that's called the Human Rights Law, but it's in the executive law if anyone's ever looking for it, because it's kind of confusing. And that is enforced and overseen by the New York State Division of Human Rights. And that applies to schools too. That change happened in 2019. They didn't used to have jurisdiction in schools, but they do. And so disability discrimination and discrimination based on sex and gender identity, because I did see a transgender question in the chat, and I'm also the transgender attorney. So that's an issue near and dear to my heart. Those are also protected by the Division of Human Rights. So complaints can be made there. Additionally, schools usually should offer due process protections for 504 students. So you should look at your school's policies and see a lot of times the due process protections are similar to special ed, just because it's easier to have one process, and courts have said that the special ed process affords the correct amount of process. So if you're following special ed due process, you're good on 504. So a lot of schools just, have the same kind of hearing process. So I know that I talked about FAPE under IDEA, and 504 also talks about FAPE, but the rub is that there are two different laws with different enforcement mechanisms. Did I hit on all the 504 stuff, Chris?
Yeah, and I just wanted to add that the Office of Special Education, the state education department in general, we do receive calls and inquiries around students that have Section 504 plans. We do provide technical assistance and some direction at times when there's there's often that intersection between Section 504 and this, a referral to the CSE process, a referral for an evaluation, where we can provide technical assistance to parents, we do, but ultimately it's a jurisdictional thing where, if it's really a parent that has an issue or has a complaint, we do then provide them with the information and refer them to the Office for Civil Rights.
All right, that's very helpful. And just because it's really closely related to that, there was a question on whether the state education department's Special Ed Quality Assurance Unit, CEQA, is impacted in any way by current changes.
Our current regional office structure remains intact. There's been no signaling of a reduction in our state staff, even though our staff are funded by those IDA dollars that we receive from the federal government. We're not getting any signals that those are being cut. Obviously, something to watch for, which I believe was the first bullet on that slide. If there are impacts to IDA funding to the states, that ultimately could have an impact on the staffing levels that the Office of Special Education or the department in general has, as we have while we work for the state education department, there are many of us that are federally funded when it comes to our position. So right now, today, no impact to those special education quality assurance regional offices, no impact to the Office of Special Education as a whole staffing. And again, that would all be contingent on the hypothetical of if there is some level of diminishing or withholding or redirecting of IDEA funds, then we may see an impact on the staffing levels of the Office of Special Education. But again, something to watch for, not something we're actively addressing now. As
right. And what I heard from the beginning, in case people were coming in late, is that IDA funding is approved by Congress. So any changing in funding would have to be approved by Congress. Do I have that right?
Yes.
Yeah. And I think that addresses some of those questions. But the other thing that you touched on, and I think there was a question about it too, which might be helpful to people. So students with disabilities benefit from funding from IDEA, but also some students benefit from funding through Medicaid. So changes in Medicaid funding could also impact the services that students receive. I think it would be helpful if people had a little bit better understanding of how Medicaid works in New York special ed system.
Yep, and Suzanne, I thought you were looking to say something, but I want to say, and that's why that is one of those things on that last slide to watch for, because that could have an impact on services to students and children with disabilities. Suzanne?
Yeah, on our website, we do actually have a Medicaid unit within the Office of Special Education, and they really liaison with the New York State Department of Health. And it's applicable to both preschool and school age students with disabilities, and it's called the preschool or school supportive health services program. And that does allow Medicaid reimbursement for eligible children for a lot of related services. So for example, physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, psychological, both for evaluation and counseling, skilled nursing, medical evaluations, medical specialist evaluations, and special transportation. So there's a lot that potentially can be reimbursed for Medicaid eligible students under that kind of school supportive health that really has a lot of overlap with IEP services that a child could receive. And then we do have obviously children who we have cross systems with our sister agencies, particularly with OPWDD or OMH, who we work closely with in some of our integrated programs like day treatment or residential treatment facility, or our CRP Children Residential Project program, where there is also Medicaid funding that can be supporting those services that we have cross-system footprint with some of the other agencies. Yes.
And Julie, just to dovetail onto the comment or the question around the special education quality assurance to regional offices, the Office of Special Education, we also use our IDEA funding to implement our educational partnerships. So our regional partnership centers around the state, as well as our family and community engagement centers around the state. If anyone, all those services and supports for districts and families and parents that we provide through that network is all IDEA funded. And at this current time, we're not planning for or seeing any need to diminish that level of support to the field as well. So not just our CEQA regional offices, but also our educational partnership today remain intact.
I did want to clarify. I just saw sort of in the chat of like, can you clarify sort of the impact to parents? And so I wanted to clarify my response a little bit to make it like, what is the true impact? So if you think about preschool on the county level or school age on the school district level, and the district has and the county is reimbursing preschool services, but the school district has the obligation to make FAPE available. And as part of FAPE, there could be these services, the related services or the list of services including nursing and skilled nursing services and a lot of the related services that a child might receive, that might be on the IEP. And for Medicaid eligible services and children, the school district and the county can draw down on Medicaid funding to help pay for those services. So what this does, it gives funding for direct services, which then also impacts sort of the overall budgets of the county and the school district, because they can rely on this funding as an additional funding stream, which frees up their other funding to go to other activities, such as instructional activities or activities that are funding all students with IEPs. And so really when you're looking at budgets and funding for special education, and if Medicaid is one of the sources that is currently being used to maintain budgets or make sure that the budget that the school district has or at the county level, that they're able to pay for the services, losing any of their funding streams to make those services available and ensure FAPE is going to have an impact in sort of how they're going to be able to do that with a funding reduction or a funding cut.
Thank you. That's very, very helpful. Just getting, there's a theme to this, and I feel like you've addressed it, but I think just to reiterate it, if they're in the occasion that New York State receives IDEA funds, is it possible that there would be no federal oversight on how those funds would be used?
I think it would depend on the law. So right now, the IDEA statute has a lot of prescriptive requirements, and sort of my section in terms of what the oversight, monitoring, and enforcement has to look like is codified in IDEA. So I think it would really have to depend on what the changes in the law say.
Right. I think that it's getting at who's going to have oversight if the U.S. Department of Education goes away. Who would have oversight over the implementation of IDEA? And that's separate from the fact that New York State has incorporated and put into law pretty much the IDEA, the provisions of the IDEA. So there's state and federal law that requires a lot of the same thing. But that is I think the question that's come through a few times, like, where would the oversight come from? How would a violation be addressed?
So it would become oversight would then fall to the state. So I mean, to Suzanne's point, which if I got it correctly, if the law is in place, if IDEA is in place, and there's just no Office of Special Education Programs at the federal level with oversight over that state, we would still be responsible to ensure the implementation of IDEA as a state. May it look different in how it's done? Yes, but that would all depend on what the changes are. The hypothetical is very hard to answer, but ultimately, IDEA remaining in place without a federal level of oversight, then that oversight would then be on the state, which, we have a very we have a system in place to ensure that the purposes and requirements of IDEA are being met, and we will continue that work. Suzanne, I saw you had come off mute. I wasn't sure if you were adding something. Judy, did you?
No, I'm thinking more, I want to get into there's a lot of questions about the DEI and that funding.
Yeah.
So there are different types of federal funding. Right now we're talking about IDEA funding because that is the funding that funds special education, but there are also other types of federal funding. So people are referencing the requested certification that US DOE sent to the New York State Education Department and school districts saying that talked about DEI policies and talked about the Civil Rights Act and some court cases. I don't know what individual school districts have done, but the department responded and said that we would not be signing that certification. We already certify when we get federal funds. There are applications. We certify that we are in compliance with the law. The administration has issued these letters. They have interpreted case law and Supreme Court cases and have directed us to interpret it using their interpretation, and they don't have the authority to do that. And we also told them that in our response letter, which I'm happy to send to Julie, and she can send that letter around. It's been all over the news, but I can send the letter in its entirety if people are interested in that. So our letter basically said we are not doing that certification and that they don't have the authority to try to make us interpret case law in the way that they want. It's also important to remember that New York State has its own anti-discrimination law. So when you talk about DEI and what it's used for and policies, prohibiting discrimination against certain classes of students, that is enshrined in New York State's human rights law. It's also, many of those categories are also enshrined in the New York State Constitution. Last time we amended the Constitution, we added sexual identity and gender expression to be constitutionally protected. So those are differences in state law, that whatever is happening federally doesn't diminish the protections in our state law.
The other thing I would add to, going back to what Chris was talking about with accountability, when I was going over the Part B application, one of the elements was where we have to identify state imposed requirements that are not required by IDEA and federal regulations. So you're going to see where we very much incorporate all of IDEA, but we exceed the federal requirements in many areas. So when you go to, when I showed you that screenshot of the Part B application and what's open kind of for public comment, our documents are included there. One of those is that document for 2025 where we have to go regulation by statute. Anything that exceeds the federal requirements, we have to include that and include an explanation. And there hasn't been change from last year, but you'll see from that, there's quite a few. So as Chris said, if the accountability falls to the state, we've got a pretty rigorous statutory and regulatory framework for the protection of students with disabilities. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you. In terms of what OSEP has reported, have you heard of any, I know you said they issue dear colleague letters. They also issue decisions in certain matters. Is there any word that those functions aren't going to continue?
We have not been made aware that those functions are being discontinued or diminished in any way.
So complaints can still be made and issues brought up, and they can still weigh in, like OSEP letters are still coming out.
I've seen a recent OSEP letter, but we're not hearing that if there wasn't one that they were, if there wasn't a topic that they wanted to issue a letter on, that they can't. So we're not hearing, there's no signal that those functions are going to stop at the federal level to states.
Okay. But it's unclear if OSEP would stay in what is now the U.S. Department of Education or could move elsewhere. Is that correct?
There would have to be a legislative change for them to be moved to another agency.
Okay. All right. That's very helpful. There's a lot of questions in here, so I'm really trying to like listen and parse through all these things and collate them. So if there's anything that's jumping out at you guys while we're talking, I feel free. Otherwise, I know that there were some specific questions about the reporting and access to those reports, which it's great that you made that available. I think a lot of people are unaware that those reports are available. There are a few questions related to that. Do you mind if I ask? So does the report include children who are waiting for classroom placements, as we have seen a number of children on home instruction?
So in terms of our state performance plan, yes, there are several indicators that are going to measure all enrollment. And so, for example, the LRE categories under our state performance plan, we are getting, it's an enrollment report. And so we do get the educational environment in which the child is receiving their services. And so we do have measurements that look at where the child is receiving services. So we are able, using that measurement, to get that data and look at that data.
Okay. And what quality indicators is New York currently struggling with?
We passed on our current kind of metric where we gave our percentage. There are quite a few points that are assigned with participation rate for assessments. So meaning that there are kind of several categories where the federal government looks at what is the participation. I think that that measurement was derived from a concern that students with disabilities should have equal access to participate in the general curriculum, and then therefore all assessments that are required, including the state assessments. And so they collect, and the concern are they kind of, not making those assessments available, not ensuring that students with disabilities are taking the state assessments. A lot of times those state assessments and looking at the proficiency rate is how school districts know whether their, instructional practices need to be improved or targeted or, sort of more tailored to the needs of their student population. And so participation has at the federal level been one of those areas where they do collect and score how is New York State performing with respect to the participation of children with disabilities on the state assessments. And that is an area that we traditionally score low. We do have obviously the ability for parents to decline to have their children participate in the state assessments. And when that happens, that does impact our score. And we have traditionally not gotten points in that area. And then there are some other areas where, for example, we have had some issues with timely evaluations and early childhood transition and post-secondary transition. So those are sort of three indicators where obviously the first one is we expect that the initial evaluation would be performed within 60 days of parent consent. And so we've sort of seen that we are not meeting that 100% requirement or that 100% target. And we're pretty flat in the kind of high 80s, but that's still sort of a low point in terms of our score. Early childhood transition, so this is from early intervention to preschool special education. The expectation is that for children who are ready to transition, they can do so by their third birthday. And we are seeing declines in that timely transition. And then for post-secondary transition, we have a very rigorous monitoring protocol in terms of what are the transition services that are included in the IEP and the Committee on Special Education processes to make sure that those services and that the structure and policies and procedures are being practiced and followed. And so we have seen some non-compliance in that area too. And then finally, an area that we are somewhat unique in is sort of timely due process in our sort of system of due process and not meeting timelines in potentially that area.
And Julie, to add to that, I would recommend that as a resource, you may want to make, or you can go onto the Board of Regents website. On Monday, we presented to the Board of Regents our new IDA determination process on how we're going to be monitoring districts as to whether or not they're meeting the requirements and purposes of IDEA. And as part of that presentation, there's you can see the specific state performance plan indicators that we have determined are critical ones for the state to focus on and actually align directly to a district's IDEA determination. So, of the 18 indicators, you'll be able to see the ones that we are really honing in on and really incorporating those directly into our determinations of whether each and every district in New York State is meeting the requirements of IDEA and using some very specific indicators to focus on. And those include many that Suzanne is talking about: timeliness of due process, but also, the evaluations, the transition from EI to preschool, looking at secondary transition to post-secondary experiences. All of that is being now incorporated into our IDA determination process. So that slide deck, that presentation is available on the Board of Regents website. We can get you the link if you want after this.
That's great. We will share that link, and thanks for sharing that. That's very timely, and it's good to know. And the indicators are based on the whole entire state, including the New York City school system. And do those indicators, do you have an analysis of regionally, like upstate is this score versus downstate is this score? Or do you look at it? Is there a regional trend related to those issues?
Yeah, I mean, so when we did the state performance plans for the 6-year period, what we have to do for the compliance indicators, they're set sort of at 100% compliance. We need to meet that threshold. But for the performance indicators, we have to establish targets. And in order for us to establish targets, we have to come up with something that is rigorous but achievable. And when we do that analysis to come up with the targets, we are absolutely looking at a lot of data, and we are looking at regional differences and to see, is this sort of a statewide issue across the board? Are there areas that we need to do improvement? So we are sort of doing that regional look. And a lot of our stakeholder engagement, we sort of looked at that data in different ways. And like, for example, LRE, to sort of see, are there pockets of the state that sort of are performing, differently. And then sort of as kind of Chris and Eileen just described, on an annual basis, we're looking at that by school district. So we're looking at, as part of the new methodology for identifying a school district, we're looking at, each district's performance and then using that for our interventions. And then there's one more area where we do look at some regional trends or kind of risk-based trends. And that's going to be part of our performance plan. If we perform worse, like in a year compared to the year prior, we have to explain why. Why did we perform worse? And so that also warrants us taking a closer look at our trend data and where are the school districts that are struggling with that particular indicator. And we do sort of outreach and professional kind of outreach and stakeholder engagement in terms of, why did you perform worse this year compared to last year, and trying to come up with the explanation, which we have to put that explanation into the public report and then explain, like, if we did worse, here's our analysis for why.
Okay, that's very helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that.
And Julie, I will do a plug for SPP Indicator 8, and we can send you the link after. That's regarding parent involvement, and it measures the percent of parents who reported that the school facilitated parent involvement. We are seeking stakeholder engagement now and really for improving the survey, really for increasing the participation of parents that complete that survey as well as representativeness. So we can send you that link because it's still open right now for stakeholder engagement.
Sure, we'd be happy to pass that on. Thank you.
And Julie, just as part of our new IDA determination process and as part of the rollout, we will be engaging parents and families in those conversations through our parent network, through our family and community engagement centers. So, you know, if parents have questions around the reasons or why their district is now being identified as not meeting the requirements of IDA, what does that mean? And just to give them a better understanding of how, you know, we as a state are having our oversight responsibility over districts under IDEA, you know, as a parent, them understanding specifically why their district is identified and the areas that they're identified under is information we think is important for them to understand and have access to. So again, we'll be doing that stakeholder engagement moving forward on that new process.
Okay, thank you. That's great to hear. There were a few questions centered on Part C, early childhood services, which I know are administered by the Department of Health versus the Department of Education. But have you heard about any changes in that regard? Is there any, at the federal level, is the U.S. Department of Ed overseeing early childhood, or is that with the, okay, so it is, but have you heard anything about any changes around early childhood services?
No, they're sort of in a similar boat to us. So they also have a state performance plan that they're submitting under our same timeline. There is a federal conference that is that they're also invited to, and traditionally we go with them and kind of represent New York State under Part B and Part C. And our Part C counterparts haven't reached out with any kind of changes that they're noticing as well. So to my knowledge, their experience is similar to ours.
Okay, that's great. I'm turning it over to you a little bit. Is there anything does anybody want to weigh in on anything?
There are a lot of questions about, you know, will New York State make up funding? Are there contingency plans in place? Most of the education funding that schools have is appropriated by the legislature and then also the local tax base. We don't provide funding. We are a pass-through agency and we administer the special education funding. And we, you know, submit budget testimony and have legislative and budgetary priorities that we, you know, present to the legislature. But that's not us that does that. So if you have questions about those contingency plans or want to advocate for contingency funding, then I would urge you to call your local representatives. You can look them up online, like New York State Assembly, Find My Senator, and then you can reach out to their offices directly. They have constituent affairs people, and I'm sure that they're hearing about these issues, but the more constituents they hear from, you know, the more seriously they take an issue.
All right, that's very helpful as well.
Julie, I do see a question that I just do want to answer because it involves it's around the IDA determination, and they're asking if our 62.5% score is that a good score? Well, that's a score that puts us in a needs assistance category. And for the Office of Special Education and for the department as a whole, it is our goal and you know, we want to see New York be a state that meets requirements under IDEA. So any score that doesn't put us in that category is, in my opinion, is not a good score. And that's why you'll see a new IDA determination process where we're hoping this will assist us in the way we are able to work with districts and have oversight over districts and monitor districts to drive improvement in those state performance plan indicators. Because at the end of the day, how districts perform on those indicators is how the state performs as a whole in the eyes of the federal government. So, we need to continue our extreme focus on improving outcomes across those state performance plan indicators statewide. And to that question, 62.5 is not a good score. We need to do much better as a state. And, that's a lot of the effort that we're putting into our new processes and the way we're working with districts and supporting districts. It's not just monitoring and identifying where you're out of compliance, but it's supporting a district to build the capacity that they can do what they need to do under IDA. So all of that is mission critical for us. And that's where, we're still very much focused on that, even though there's a lot of noise and chaos going on at the federal level in the education space. We still remain focused here in New York on, those things that we want to continue to work on and improve for students with disabilities.
And to add on that, if it would help, Julie, we can also send you the link specific to, we've talked and several of us have around Office of Special Education Educational Partnership and really the technical assistance work that they do with districts. So if it's helpful, we can provide that link.
Yeah, that would be great. It sounds like between, the stakeholder input that you're recruiting for right now, and these other initiatives, there's a commitment to address these issues and a way for parents and others to be involved in it.
And when you saw that slice of the pie that I was talking about, that 15% of the set aside, a big piece of that goes to the, when we were talking about the educational partnership and the work that they do. That's a big piece of those funds. So we'll send you along the link. So it's just a targeted link as you provide it.
Thank you. There was a question in here, and I think it might be helpful to look at, because I think it wraps some of the larger questions here, which is who's responsible for providing a free, appropriate public education? Is it federal, state, local school district? Who's responsible for ensuring a student has a free, appropriate public education?
FAPE is the response. Well, under IDEA, the federal government has an oversight responsibility to ensure FAPE, that they oversee states to ensure that states are implementing the requirements and purposes of IDEA to ensure FAPE. But ultimately, the provision of a free, appropriate public education to a student with a disability in New York is the responsibility of their public school district. And that's what we have oversight over, to ensure that that is occurring.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. I'm not going to pose any more questions. We're nearing the end of our time. I want to thank you all very, very much for taking the time to come today and allay some of the fears that I think people have. I mean, it is uncertain times and things are changing on a daily basis. But it is, I know, reassuring to know that right now there is no clear indicator that IDEA is going away, and that would take, congressional act, and that OSEP is in place, and that there is no impact on funding that we're aware of yet. I think those are great takeaways, and I appreciate you sharing that information. I also want to give a shout out to Helen Helmuth here at Disability Rights New York for administering the registration. She'll also be in touch with all of our links that we're going to be sending. We will also send out a link of the recording of this presentation and the PowerPoint that was shared. So give us a few days to try to get all that information out. I also want to remind everyone to please complete an evaluation if you're willing to. One of the spaces on that evaluation is to talk about or make suggestions of topics that you would like to hear more about. That really helps us choose what events we bring to you. And so please share in that way. But I want to thank you again very much. And unless you have any wrap-up words.
Just, Julie, we recognize the concerns, the anxiety, the fears that people have. And because, we're hearing it as well. And I just want, as things unfold, if things changes, if those things on that last slide to watch for, if some become a reality, we'll be the first to be engaging the field and our stakeholders to, inform them and keep them informed of any changes that might occur or that may have an impact on the way we serve and have oversight and ensure that students with disabilities are receiving a free, appropriate public education. So any impacts to that, we will be ensuring that the field is aware of. So I just wanted to, let people know that we understand why there is a need for a meeting like this and that people genuinely have concerns, and we understand that, and we will ensure that we're doing our best to keep everybody informed.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Everybody have a great day.